My name is Devin Carter, and I'm interviewing Larry Judge on the 24th of March 2016 at 1:15 Saddlebrook. Mr. Judge, could you please begin by spelling your full name?
Well, Larry, of course, Larry, and the last name Judge, just like in the court, Judge.
Where were you born?
Born in Pittsburgh, and first lived in Oakland, which is a section of Pittsburgh, and lived there for about a year and a half, and then moved from there to Wilkinsburg, lived two different places in Wilkinsburg, and then moved on over to Pitcairn, which is a small town east of Pittsburgh. And when I was 5 years old, moved to Irwin, and that is my hometown.
So, where would you consider that you are from? Pittsburgh?
As far as that question, I think I would answer by saying I'm from Irwin.
Irwin? Okay.
Norwood High School, in the town of Irwin. Actually, we lived about a mile up the hill from Irwin in a village called Circleville.
How long did you live in Irwin?
My parents moved there in 1947, and for all practical purposes, I would say that I lived there until 1960 when I came to college here at IUP, it was then Indiana State College. And then actually lived back in Irwin for a year, my second year after I graduated from college, because I was teaching in a neighboring school district and lived at home that year. That was in 1965, 66 year. And been here in Indiana ever since, except, well, not quite. Moved back to Indiana then in 66, stayed here 3 years, and Elaine, my wife, and I moved then for 3 years, as it turned out, over to New Wilmington, Pennsylvania, to work at Westminster College. I worked at Westminster for 2 years, and then spent a year on the way back in Trenton, New Jersey, working for the community college there. I came back to Indiana in 1972, and then I've been here ever since then.
What were some good memories you had as a child?
Good memories. Well, they were all good. Trying to pick something out. My home life, of course. My parents were just great, and just great parents, and I miss them to this day. They've been gone for a number of years now, but that was particular memory from childhood and from the years. And then through the years, my involvements in school, elementary, junior high school, and all the different things I did in those years.
What were your parents' names?
My father's name was Ralph, but everybody called him Bud Judge. And my mother's name was Eileen.
Can you describe your father?
He was a little taller than I am, which I think he always took great pride in. That I'm about 5'6". He was 5'8", and not a husky man, just average build, but comparatively short. And my mother was 5'1". If I say so myself to this day, a very attractive woman, and everyone who knew her loved her.
What did they do for a living?
My father was a machinist most of the years that he worked with Westinghouse Electric. Worked in East Pittsburgh, which is a big plant, had been at that time at least. And they worked a couple of other plants in East Liberty section of Pittsburgh and in Trafford. And then he worked for a small carbide steel plant in West Mifflin near the Allegheny County Airport. He had been laid off twice with Westinghouse for 6 months at a time. And then he got the opportunity to go with this carbide steel plant, which I think at the time had 35 employees. And they said, you will not get laid off here because the only way we get laid off is if we go out of business, and we're not going to let that happen. And that's what he did. And my mother was a homemaker, and then she worked for a good number of years with Rockwell Manufacturing in their office in Pittsburgh. And she always said when I was growing up, when she was younger, she did not wish to go back to work when she got married. But my dad, having been laid off twice, she found it necessary to go back to work, and she did. And then she worked with Rockwell for a good number of years.
What kinds of occupations did other people in town have?
A good many people at that time worked say, either for Westinghouse or worked for the steel plants in McKeesport. Um, Mostly manual labor, you know.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes, I have one sister. She's 4 years younger than I, and she lives north of Pittsburgh, and she's widowed. But she's my one sibling, my sister. Yes.
Can you describe what Indiana was like when you were here during your early adult years?
Indiana was a great college town. It was in every good sense of the word. Um, from the very first day of freshman orientation, uh, just I felt very much at home here. Very much at home. So, lived in Whitmire Hall my freshman year.
Mm-hmm.
We just did a reunion last summer of what we called the Whitmire Seminar. There were about a dozen of us
Mm-hmm.
who did everything and went everywhere together. I mean, just enjoyed each other tremendously from the first day of freshman orientation. That first night, we all walked down Philadelphia Street and went to what was then Manus Theater and went to the movies. And after that, we did all sorts of things together. And
So you did your student teaching at the Keith School, correct?
did my student teaching at Key School, yes.
Now, other than the student teaching, did you have any other affiliation with the Keith School?
No,
No?
no.
Okay. What grade did you teach?
I student taught American history, 8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
The fall semester of 1963-64, and then 5 weeks of European history, world history at the same time, that same semester. But,
Can you describe the school?
the school physically, of course, was as you see it now,
Mhm.
about to be torn down, but as you see it momentarily at least. And it was, as far as physical layout, that was pretty much the same. That did not change that much through the years. They did add the Keith Annex years later,
Mm-hmm.
but the original building was as you see it. As far as describing it, other than physical, it was a small school. The 8th grade class, of which I taught all semester, had I think 31 students, and it was there was only one at that time. By the time I student taught there, junior high level, there was only one section of each grade. In other words, one 7th grade, one 8th grade, and one 9th grade.
Mm-hmm.
That was the last year that I taught, or the only semester I taught. That was the last year for Keith having a 9th grade.
Really?
It was only through 8th grade after that, and that was just for a couple of years. Then they cut back to strictly elementary for a time.
Okay. What were some of the big events that were held at the school?
You know, I was just talking before you came with my wife, because one of the things she remembered from her years was a great many activities, clubs, organizations, etc. To be honest, I don't remember any of that. I remember teaching the class. I remember the students being there for class,
Mm-hmm.
but I honestly don't remember great many organizations or activities or clubs. There may have been. Elaine said, maybe you just weren't aware of them. I said, I think I would have been.
Mm-hmm.
But by that time, at the junior high level, they may not have been doing that. I do remember they did a play shortly before Christmas that year.
Mm-hmm.
She asked me, she said, do you remember the orchestra? I said, no, I don't remember that at all. If they had one, I don't know. I don't think they did.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Do you have any special teaching memories about your time at Keith
I
School?
remember a couple of things, yes. One thing that I was very conscious of trying to do was that I had probably 5 or 6 students that were top-notch A-plus students. They were intelligent. They really were top of the line.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so occupied with trying to keep them interested and trying to keep them challenged that I concentrated on teaching them. What was happening was that a lot of the other kids were getting lost. And I not proud of that to this day, but it's a fact.
Mm-hmm.
My supervising teacher told me that one day, she said, all right, she said, when you go into class, she said, I don't want you to go on, because we always did a detailed lesson plan for each day, and I would have maybe 18 questions lined up for that class I wanted to cover. She said, I don't want you to go beyond your first question until you are sure that almost, if not all, of your students understand the answers, understand what you're looking for in the questions that you've asked. Don't go on to any other questions. So I remember that day to this day, that I asked the question, and it became very clear that a good number of the kids were lost. And so I did not go beyond that first question that day. I remember asking one young lady in the class, I said, well, tell me what the Secretary of State does. And she said, is the Secretary of State in charge of all the states? And I said, no. And I explained then what Secretary of State does, foreign affairs, etc. And I remember that whenever you were a student taught at Keith, you not only had the students in your class you were teaching to, but college, university students, it's college, they say college, so it was college students, would come into your class for the class, and they would sit around the edge of the room, and you would have a dozen or more college students at the same time you had your regular class. And my roommate that year was going to be student teaching second semester, and he said, Larry, he said, you're teaching your class like a university class. He said, you can't do that. So I thought about it, and I thought, he's right. And I do remember my aunt, who was a long-time elementary teacher in the United School District. My aunt told me one day, she said, okay, from what you're telling me, you're not teaching kids, you're teaching book. She said, you can't do that. So those are my memories of the actual teaching at the time.
And how do you think they impacted you later in your life?
I think that even though I was very proud of the fact that I got an A in student teaching, despite the problems I had faced, my supervising teacher saw fit to give me an A, but I did not feel I was meant to teach. I did not feel I was a good teacher. I didn't feel I would be a good teacher. So my original plan was to go on into some other field other than teaching. My first thought was I would go to newspaper work. And but then, when I graduated, I had applied to teach history because I did love the subject. I actually felt I still wanted to do that. And I applied for teaching positions. And I remember I applied at Norwin, my home school district, and I knew the superintendent very well. There was a great relationship with him. And he sat me down and he said, Larry, he said, I have to tell you. He said, we have one vacancy. He said, I have 200 applicants for that vacancy because there were just no jobs teaching history. At that time, and I don't know if it's still true, at that time, if you wanted to teach history, practically everyone who graduated from college had enough credits to be certified to teach. And so a lot of coaches, a lot of people who weren't really interested in teaching were getting history jobs. And then those who just plain wanted to teach history were pretty much out of luck.
They were left in the cold.
Time. Yeah. And so he said, I can't hire you. Now the young man who had done student teaching at Norwin that same semester, the same year as I had been at Keith, had gotten an A in student teaching there. He had been a good teacher. He later became the chairman of the Social Studies Department, Robert Morris. So, I mean, he was good, and he deserved the job, and he got it. And so then I, after that initial attempt to get a teaching position, I did get one in Ohio. I was taught in Lorain, Ohio, about 30 miles west of Cleveland, because I had enough credits in English that I could get an English teaching position there. And my first thought was that someone had told me that they were about to hire a public relations director for the school district in Lorain, and I had applied for that. And the personnel director wrote back and said, if we can have that position, you are a candidate. He said, if not, we have an English teacher position for you. And so I did teach English that first year in Lorraine. And then I wanted to either come back here or come back to Irwin. I did not want to be. I was living by myself and made friends through the years, through that year that I was there, but had not really felt at home and thought I wanted to come back either to Indiana or back to Irwin. So I did get a job at Penn Trafford, what's now part of Penn Trafford District down in near Irwin. It was called Penn Joint at that time. Got an junior high school English position then and taught that year there. And then they had hoped to hire me here on campus as soon as I graduated from college, because I had been, as a student, I was sports information director my junior and senior years on campus. And the public relations director had hoped to hire me. But at that time, you need to get approval for positions of any position in Harrisburg. And they could not get the funding, could not get approval. And so I was not hired either of those years. But then after the second year of teaching, they did find a way, and I came to work on campus and worked there from 1966 until I retired. Well, except for the 3 years at Westminster and in Trenton. I came back in '72 and stayed and worked on campus until I retired in 2002, 30 years later.
Nice. Do you have any interesting stories about your time working at IUP that you would like to share?
Oh, there's so many. I was sports information director then from 1969. I'm sorry, 1972. That would be, I get track of my years here. 72. I had been from 66 to 69. I was both a sports information director and what they call director of public information, did the news side as well, those 3 years. Came back in 72, came back as alumni director for 7 years. Did that from 72 until 79. 79, I became full-time sports information director. And as far as actual particular memories, there are so many. I wouldn't know where to begin, really.
Just any one that sticks out in particular? Most important, most influential?
Pick one.
Or two.
Yeah, two.
We have time.
Great experience I had in the 1970s as alumni director was that we had a situation where at that time the Alumni Association was very limited. It was almost purely senior women, retired women. There was no appeal beyond that to younger graduates. And so we caught people's imagination by being able to sponsor a number of European tours and group tours. And we would work together with the alumni from California, PA, and we would charter a DC-8 together, 250 passengers, and almost overnight sell it out. And so we made a number of European trips. Very fortunate in being able to do that. Hawaii and Europe. I went to Hawaii, went to Spain, went to Switzerland, went to Rome. Great experiences. So that's a highlight, yes.
That does sound like a highlight. Why did you attend IUP?
At the time, whenever I first decided to come to college, of course, I wanted to be a teacher. And Indiana State College at that time had the reputation, for the most part kept through the years, as the best of the 14 state-related or state-affiliated institutions. I mean, so I thought, go the best. So I only applied here. Didn't apply at other college. Got information from several, but then the actual application here.
Did you or any of your friends have any after-school jobs or after-class jobs?
Well, of course, whenever I was sports information director as a student, my junior and senior years, that was I wouldn't say full-time, but it was a demanding position to have as a student. Um, one of the things you asked me about my student teaching memories, I remember teaching all day long, morning and afternoon, then starting to prepare for the next day until about dinner time, stop for dinner on the way back. I was living in the fraternity house at that time. The way back to the house, stopping for dinner, then being up. Well, no, before I would even go to dinner, I would stop by the office to do the sports information work on my way home for a couple of hours. Then get back to the house, have dinner, and then start work for the student teaching for the next day. And almost every night I was up to 1 o'clock in the morning.
It's a long day.
It was a long day, a demanding day. And I used to be very jealous of some of my friends who lived in the house, as they were also student teaching. They weren't doing the work that I was needing to do. Mm-hmm. And that I remember well, yes.
What were some of the racial and ethnic groups that lived in the Indiana area while you attended IUP?
Indiana at that time, and for a good many years, did not really have a racial or ethnic component. I was probably aware that there were a few minorities, but very few, and they were largely invisible. You never saw them in town at all. And ethnic, Elaine has more memories of that than I do because she's Italian, and she felt more of the effects of somewhat, to be honest, somewhat biased town at that time. Mm-hmm. It was not really an open society.
How would that compare to Norwin, where you grew up?
It compared to Norwin. In the Norwin was, Norwin did not have any ethnic, not any racial minorities. I remember talking with a friend of mine, Jim Mill, who is on campus, has been for years. Jim married one of my classmates from Norwin. We were at a Christmas party one time, and I said, Jim, we never had any blacks at Norwin. And I never knew why. I said, I was never aware of any conscious effort to keep them out, never aware of any bias, prejudice. He said, he just looked at me and said, you don't know your hometown very well. He said, I sat in the Moose Bar in Irwin with friends of my wife, his in-laws. Mm-hmm. He said, I can tell you. And there were efforts mm-hmm. I wasn't even aware of growing up, but they obviously were there. Mm-hmm.
How have things changed since you've been here in Indiana, right, racially and ethnically?
Well, it's obvious, and it's for the better. We're a much more diverse community now than mm-hmm. we were at that time. Very diverse, and for the most part, I think that's had a positive effect.
Okay. So, do you still feel a connection to the Keith School at all?
Certainly not the same way that Elaine does. My wife, she had gone through all their elementary and junior high school years at Keith. Mm-hmm. She went through the sophomore year of high school there. Did not go to Indiana High School until she was a junior and senior that year. Mm-hmm. So she had much closer connection with the school than I ever did. Mm-hmm. But, I have a good feeling about having been there that semester and having had experiences. Mm-hmm. But I can't really say that I had a close connection with the school now.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any children?
Yes, we have one daughter, Lisa, who is 38 years old, and she is near Cleveland. She's now been in Cleveland 20 years. Mm-hmm. She's been there longer than she ever was here, because she went to college when she was 18, went to Baldwin-Wallace University near Cleveland, mm-hmm. and then she was very fortunate, and after having graduated from Baldwin-Wallace, got a position with the Cleveland Orchestra. Not in the orchestra, but she was in their education division. And she used to take musicians out into the public schools and meet with the students in their classes. And she did that for 11 years. And then she had always said she liked to work at Baldwin-Wallace if she ever got the opportunity. And she did. She's now assistant alumni director at BW.
Wow.
And this is about her 5th year of doing that now. Yeah.
Good. Did she attend the Key School?
No.
No.
No. She went to St. Bernard Elementary School, the Catholic elementary school here.
How do you see IUP's role within the broader Indiana community?
The university, IUP, is the leader of the community. I mean, of course, just statistically, if it weren't for the university and the hospital, there'd be no employment to speak of here. Those are the 2 largest employers by far. I think that IUP has a great influence in the community too, and that it presents cultural and educational opportunities for the community as well as the students. The only downside of IUP's presence in the community is you do have things like St. Patty's Day, at least once a year, and you have the disruption and conflicts and so forth that come from that. But that's a negative aspect, but I don't think it's a major aspect of the whole community.
It's actually interesting that you say that. My next question is, college towns sometimes experience a town-gown divide between the university and the community. Do you think this has been an issue in Indiana?
I don't think it's been that great of an issue. I feel that it's a situation where you have a great many community members, people in the community, who just don't feel a connection to the campus. But that's neither pro nor con. In other words, I just don't feel that it's an anti-IUP feeling so much as just not aware.
Would you classify it more as, anti-rowdy college student as compared to anti-university?
Yes, I would.
So after attending IUP and then returning, what made you really want to stay in the area?
As far as, I don't know if there was ever an actual decision that I reached on that. It was just that I was here. I was going to try the best job that I could in the work that I was doing. Never had any thought of wanting to leave. I just felt I was here. This is where I was to be. And I would be here, and I would do the best I could in being here. I did have some thoughts in the first 3 years that I worked here, from 66 to 69, because at that time the school had started to get bigger. I remembered IUP as a much smaller school. Whenever I came as a freshman in 1960, there were 3,200 students. By the time I graduated, 4 years later, there were 5,000.
Wow.
And then in 1966, when I came back to work, there were, I believe, 6,000. And it grew steadily each year after that. I mean, until as of a year or so ago, we had 14,000 plus students. I think I saw one figure over 15. And I felt that we had gotten too big. We had lost a lot of the personality and the good, warm feeling we had about the campus in getting bigger. I heard many people say at the time that we had probably had the facilities and the staff to do a decent job with 10,000 students, but not 14, 15. It was too many. And that was, as far as trying to say about whether or not I had planned to stay here. In those 3 years, I did feel that I wanted to go elsewhere, to a smaller school. And then in 1969, did go to Westminster for that 1,500 students. Went there and turned out to be only there 2 years. But that wasn't my thought at the time. My thought going there was I was going to stay there. Ran into some campus politics situations, and don't need to dredge all of that up anymore. But that's how I ended up in Trenton, New Jersey for a year.
So, how has IUP and Indiana changed or stayed the same since, your first experience as a freshman to your long career working there?
Well, it's obviously larger, as I was saying, much larger. Um, as far as changes of the school itself, it involved in a great many more curricula than there were at the time. It was a teacher preparation institution at the time when I first came to school. And then it, of course, expanded and grew into a great many other fields. I think that for the most part, it has kept a good collegial feeling. I mean, it is still, even though it's larger, is not is so much a big. You're not a no-name person. I mean, people know your name, and they understand and value you as that person. And I think that's for the most part true.
So, going back to your student teaching experience, what other schools could you have student taught at other than Keith?
Whenever I was appointed sports information director as a student, our public relations director had said that I could student teach either at Keith or at Indiana High School. And whichever I'd be assigned to, that's where I would go. And so I was assigned to Keith.
Okay. Is there anything else that you would like to share in the interview?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I think that you've covered the waterfront pretty well. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, no. Thank you for sharing very much. We really appreciate it. We're going to add them to the IUP Oral History Project.
Very good.